Billionaire father watches waitress feed his disabled son, and it changes his life. The rain beat hard against the windows of the small cafe in Munich. The streets were wet, and the headlights of the cars reflected off the asphalt. Barbara Weber was tiredly cleaning the counter as the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Her long workday was coming to an end, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Rent bills, a broken bicycle she couldn't afford to fix. Life felt like a never-ending battle, and she was always on the losing side. "Barbara, you can close up," her coworker Thiago called from the kitchen. "Yeah, I'm just taking out the trash," she replied with a sigh. Putting on her jacket, she grabbed the trash bags and stepped out into the rain. She had no idea that this moment would change her life forever. The rain had gotten stronger. Barbara pulled her jacket tighter around her neck as she looked out at the dark street. That's when she saw him, a boy sitting alone in a wheelchair in the rain. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. His blonde hair was soaked, and his face pale from the cold. Barbara felt her heart tighten. "Hey, what are you doing out here? Where are your parents?" she asked, kneeling beside him, her voice gentle but concerned. The boy was shivering, his hands gripping the arms of the wheelchair. "I don't know," he said softly, anxiously. Barbara didn't hesitate for a second. She couldn't just leave him there. "Come on, let's go inside. I'll make you some hot chocolate." As she wheeled him through the cafe door, she had no idea they were being watched. Barbara took off David's wet jacket and wrapped him in a warm blanket. "It's going to be okay," she smiled encouragingly. The boy nodded timidly, holding the steaming cup of hot chocolate in both hands. "You're really nice," he murmured finally. Barbara chuckled softly. "Oh, I'm just a waitress." With a lot of compassion, outside, in the protection of a black SUV with tinted windows, sat Enrique Falk, 45, watching the scene. His gaze was serious, his fingers drumming slowly on the steering wheel. He was used to people seeing his son differently, reacting with pity, uncertainty, or distance. But this woman treated David as if he were just a child. And that was something Enrique Falk couldn't ignore. Enrique leaned back, eyes still on Barbara. Who was she? A simple waitress who knew nothing about his wealth. A stranger who had helped without hesitation. His assistant Wesley, in the passenger seat, cleared his throat. "Mr. F, would you like to intervene?" Enrique didn't respond immediately. His gaze wandered back to David, now smiling as he chatted with Barbara. When was the last time he'd seen his son so carefree? Enrique took a deep breath. "Find out who she is." The lights of the Falk Tower reflected off the tall windows as Enrique stood in his office, a file in hand. "Barbara Weber," he murmured, flitting through the pages. His assistant Wesley stood discreetly at his side. "Our research showed she's worked as a waitress for 3 years. Before that, she worked in a small family business, but had to file for bankruptcy." Enrique looked deeper into the file. "No degree. No special qualifications. No connections to the press or business circles," he said thoughtfully. "None," Wesley confirmed. Enrique leaned against the desk. "And yet, she's the only one who treats David without prejudice." Wesley hesitated. "What exactly do you have in mind for her, Mr. Falk?" Enrique looked out the window. "You'll find out." The next morning, Barbara was back at her cafe. The incident with David lingered in her mind, but life had moved on until a black Bentley parked right in front of the door. Conversations in the cafe died down when Enrique Falk stepped out, wearing a tailored suit. His charisma was tightly controlled. He looked like a man who rarely had to ask for anything. And now he was walking into her small cafe. Barbara noticed him immediately, not because of his clothes, but because of his presence. He watched her intently, as if trying to read her. He approached the counter. "Barbara Weber?" She paused, heart racing. "Yes, I am. Enrique Falk, we need to talk." "Sit down," he said calmly, taking a seat in a corner of the cafe. Barbara crossed her arms. "If you're here because I brought your son inside, I just wanted to help him." Enrique watched her for a moment, then shook his head. I'm not here to complain. Quite the opposite. Barbara raised an eyebrow. Then why? Enrique leaned back. I've been thinking about you, about people like you. And people like me, she laughed dryly. What's that supposed to mean? Waitresses with too much sympathy. Enrique's lips barely moved, the corners of his mouth twitching. Waitresses with compassion or rare. Even rarer are people who aren't impressed by status or money. Barbara was silent, then she asked, What do you want? Enrique handed her a card. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. My office, Falk Tower. Why? Enrique looked at her like the answer was obvious. Because I'm going to make you an offer. The rest of the day felt surreal to Barbara. She held the business card in her hand, turning it over between her fingers. Enrique Falk, CEO of Falk Group. Why would a billionaire want to talk to her? You've been staring at that card for 5 minutes, Thiago, her coworker, joked with a smile. I don't know if I should go, he's one of the most powerful men in Germany. What do I have to lose? She bit her lip. If she went, she'd step into a world that wasn't hers. But if she didn't, she'd always wonder what could have been. Want to know how this story ends? If you're curious to discover the ending of this twist-filled narrative, don't leave the video now. We still have much more to show, and you won't want to miss the surprising details. Make sure to subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment letting us know what you think so far. Keep watching and find out how this emotional story unfolds. The next morning, as Barbara stood in front of the Falk Tower, she felt for the first time in her life like she didn't belong. The towering buildings loomed over Munich, their massive glass windows reflecting the blue sky. Men in suits, with folders, running through revolving doors, smartphones to their ears, faces full of important thoughts. And she was just a waitress in an old denim jacket. Can I help you? Asked the receptionist, already looking at her with skepticism. Barbara took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and handed over the card. I have an appointment with Enrique Falk. In half a second, the woman's posture changed. Her eyes widened slightly, and her voice became more polite. Of course, Mr. Falk is already expecting you. And with that sentence, Barbara entered a world that was not hers. Enrique noticed the moment Barbara walked into his office. She looked around the room, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of Monique. A minimalist desk made of dark wood, an atmosphere of perfection and control. I told myself, if a billionaire invites me, I shouldn't be late, she said, sitting in front of him. Enrique looked at her with the suggestion of a smile. She wasn't afraid of him, he liked that. So, let's get straight to the point. He leaned back. I want you to work for me. Barbara blinked. What? I need someone to take care of certain things. Someone who isn't from this world and who sees me and my son with different eyes. You don't need an assistant. You need a reality check. She laughed lightly. Call it what you want. The offer stands. Barbara didn't know what to say. But what she didn't know was that not everyone in the Falk Tower agreed with her arrival. So that's her, the waitress, two employees whispered as Barbara walked down the hallway. She could feel their skeptical stares, their silent, disparaging comments. Probably just a whim of Mr. Falk. She won't last a week. Barbara kept her head held high, ignoring them. But inside, she felt the uncertainty growing. When she arrived at Enrique's office, he was already seated at his desk. Tough first hour, he asked without looking up from his papers. Barbara sat across from him. Oh, fantastic. I love it when people treat me like I'm air. Enrique raised an eyebrow. Then you fit in well here. I'm also quite ignore. She looked at him with skepticism. You're Enrique F. who dares to ignore you. A small smile tugged at his lips. More people than you think. A brief moment of silence. A moment of understanding, before Barbara even realized she was laughing. And Enrique realized it had been a long time since he had heard someone genuinely laugh. Later that night, Barbara was sitting in the lounge of the company, flipping through some documents, when a familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Do you regret it yet?" She looked up at Enrique, who was standing in front of her with two glasses in hand, one with whiskey and one with water. He handed her the water. "Not yet," she said, taking a sip, "but I do wonder why I'm here." Enrique leaned back. "They're here because they're different." She laughed softly. "Sounds like I'm an experiment." Enrique went quiet for a moment. "Maybe, but it's an experiment I like so far." His voice was calm, his gaze attentive, and suddenly the air between them changed. But before Barbara could respond, Enrique's phone rang. He glanced at it, stood up, and became once again the Enrique Foch the world knew. "We'll talk later." As he walked away, Barbara felt that he hadn't been speaking only about work. The Foch Tower was in turmoil overnight. Confidential information from Enrique's company had been leaked to the press. Business strategies, confidential contracts, all suddenly made public. In a dark conference room, Enrique stood with his arms crossed, his face expressionless, as his security team spoke. "We've checked the internal access logs," one said seriously. "The data was stolen from a company computer." Enrique said nothing. The access point was Barbara's computer. A moment of icy silence. Enrique slowly looked up. His face betrayed nothing. But inside, something began to crack. Barbara knew something was wrong the moment she entered the office. The stairs, the sudden silence, the feeling of being watched. Then Enrique stood in front of her. "In my office, now." His voice was cold, leaving no room for discussion. Barbara followed, her heart pounding. As soon as the door closed behind her, he placed a stack of printed media on the desk. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Barbara frowned and flipped through the papers, then she froze. "This was supposed to be me." Enrique crossed his arms. "The evidence is clear. It was your access." "Enrique, I didn't do this." Her voice trembled. "I would never do this. Give me a reason to believe you." His eyes were harder. The never-end that hurt more than anything. Barbara felt her stomach tighten. "I can't believe you think." Enrique looked at her. His gaze wasn't filled with anger, but with doubt. "Someone was using my computer," she said, hugging herself. "I'm not stupid, Enrique. Why would I do this when I know everything can be tracked?" He pressed his lips together, turned away, and took a few steps across the room. "Then I don't know." Barbara felt her heart sink. "You don't believe me. It doesn't make sense." "But even I don't know." And in that exact moment, she realized he didn't trust her. Barbara sat on her small couch, staring into space. Enrique didn't fire her directly, but he also didn't believe her, and that was almost worse. She let the past few days play over and over in her head, searching for something she had missed. Then it hit her, the man in the cafe, a few weeks ago. A customer who had asked many questions about the F group, about Enrique. He had seemed friendly, but now, in hindsight, it all felt too directed. Barbara clenched her hands into fists. If no one else would fight for her, then she'd have to do it herself. Barbara stood in front of the door to a small, discreet office. She had found out the man's name. Antonio Marx, a consultant who had been in the cafe weeks earlier. Her heart was racing. She knew she wouldn't find hard evidence here, but she needed answers. When the door opened, Antonio froze. "What do you want?" "I know it was you who leaked the information," Barbara said calmly, but firmly. He laughed. "Do you have evidence?" Barbara raised her phone. "This conversation is being recorded." Antonio's smile vanished. "Enrique Foch is going to hear it, and then we'll see how safe you still feel." His face went pale. "Wait, we can't." "We certainly can," she interrupted. "I'm done being pushed around." And with those words, she turned and left him standing there. Enrique was sitting in his office when his phone rang. "What is it?" His voice sounded tired. He hadn't slept well since Barbara had left. But what he heard next made him rise to his feet. "Enrique, I have the proof," said Barbara on the other end of the line. "I can prove to you that I'm innocent." 10 minutes later, she was in his office. Her gaze was firm, her chin held high. She wasn't there to ask for forgiveness. Antonio Mark stole the information and sold it, she said, placing the phone on his desk. Enrique played the recording. Antonio's voice. His confession. It was all there. A deep, heavy breath. Enrique looked up. In his eyes, there was not only relief but guilt. Barbara. His voice was low. Keep it, she said coldly. I just wanted you to know the truth. Then she turned and left. Enrique watched her. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Days went by. Barbara didn't contact Enrique again. He did everything he could to limit the damage. Antonio was caught. The media reported on the scandal. But he didn't care because the only thing that mattered was no longer there. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He drove to the small cafe where it had all begun. And there she was. Barbara sat alone at a table, a cup of coffee in front of her, her gaze fixed on nothing. Enrique took a deep breath, then walked over to her. You sit there like nothing happened, she said without looking up. He pulled the chair back and sat down. I can't change what happened. I doubted you, Barbara. But I can say it was my biggest mistake. Silence. Then she looked at him. In her eyes, there was still hurt but also something else. I don't know if I can forgive you, Enrique, he nodded slowly. Then let me prove to you that I'm worth it. A moment, a breath. Then Barbara picked up her coffee cup and pushed it toward him. Start with this. Pay for the coffee. Enrique blinked. And then, slowly, she smiled. And in that moment, she knew it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this story full of twists, emotion, and life lessons, don't miss the next ones we share. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell to get notified whenever we post a new video. Follow real stories that inspire, move, and make you reflect. Subscribe now and become part of our community.